Hi, Keith Livingston here with Healthy Intelligent Training. Today I'm talking with Kevin Ryan, who is one of New Zealand's great marathon runners and cross-country runners and road runners. Also starred on the track. Over to you, Kevin. How did it all get started?
It started at school. I think it probably started more at intermediate school when I was at Kauai. I actually, they had a little team there, and I joined up. Max Cullum actually went to the same school as I, so they used to have a race around the roads there and up the one little hill and down Dominion Road and back to the school. But Max always won everything. And then many years later, I think Max was picked up by Arthur Lydia, who was coaching him at high school. I went on to Auckland Boys, and I ran there in the 800s with Warwick Lightbourne was there at that time. And not as successful. I just, was on the team, ran my heart out, but there was something to do, and it was interesting, right? So I ran at Auckland Boys, and then I left Auckland Boys when I was before I was 15, to be quite honest. My mother's partner, Charlie, had a fruit and veg shop in Dominion Road, and he had an accident where he tore something in his back, and I was pretty useless at school anyway, so it wasn't like I was missing anything in a lot of ways, because my whole life I was brought up in a single family home until Charlie came along. So my mother, I'll digress a little bit, was a nurse and a head matron at the Green Lane Hospital, so she always worked the night shifts, and so she'd be some nights gone earlier in the evening and come home just before it was time to go to school, and this went on all of them up until I was 14, 15, 16. So I was both, I was probably one of those keyhole kids. Some days my dinner would be there and whatever, and so not a lot of assistance with homework. I was an avid reader. I loved to read, but the other parts of things never worked out. So I was out of school at 15 and working in a fruit shop, and then I got a job. I got an apprenticeship at a printing place, but that didn't sort of suit me. So I moved on to the railways and then on to telecom. I don't know how it came about. I think it was after the Rome Olympics and Snell and all the boys had come back, and there was headlines in the paper how they ran for Oahu, and I was running at that time, just generally running around the streets, keeping fit. So I got on a bus one day and took myself down to the Oahu Club and joined up. And I was probably 16 then, and met Terry Matterford, Gary Litt had become a couple of my best mates, and I ran with them. And and I then met Jeff Julian, who became my first coach, and went to my first track nationals, I think, when I was probably 16 in the steeplechase and the 3 mile. So back in those days, it was Kevin Harvey and Doug Lowry and a whole bunch. Gordon Sumble, who was a steeplechaser. It was a really good group of guys. I mean, a lot of really good athletes that didn't go all the way through. What the promise they had was far greater than mine. That never used to the, well, in Gordon's case, he broke his ankle, so I guess, and then stuffed up the tendons in his ankle. But and the other boys, they were all blessed good runners, and I don't really had talent coming out their ears, but never seemed to take it that extra step. In my case, it was like, I ran, and then, I didn't think that I was ever going to get to where I did get to. That was never crossed my mind. I was in the surf club for all those years, so I used to just run a little bit of track and run some cross country. Cross country, unless you're really fit, you find out later in life if you're going to be a cross country runner, you really have to train your ass off to be able to manage it. So, it was until Jeanette and I got married, and I was still running. Fred was my mate one of my best mates there. So I had two really good, really close friends that supported me throughout. I mean, that was Fred and that was Gary Lydiard. I mean, you couldn't wish for two nicer people, greater guys to be there when wherever the shit was going down or you're in the, you needed help. They were always there. Fred ran with me day in, day out. So did Gary. I mean, it would have been 72 when it was in Cornwall Park. And the year before I got on the Nationals, I finished, I think, 12th at the National Cross Country. And at that time, I was being coached by Don Berg, and I'd moved on from Jeff. Don and Jeff were friends, and we all ran together anyway. So it was sort of, Don was then coaching Fred, and Fred was doing better and better. And at that time, Jeff had a young family, and I didn't feel like I wanted to intrude on everything all the time. So I just went along with Fred, and ran with Don. And then I had a pretty good national championships, and I went to the national track in Hamilton. That was for 72 Olympics, I guess. And I ran the 10,000. I ran like a sack of potatoes. I mean, it was so bad, it must have been embarrassing. And then after that, I sort of, Bailey came across me and he said, well, I think I could help you out and you could do better. Do this, this, and this. So, of course, I talked to Don. He said, well, you try it out. So I went, and I guess that was a turning point in my running career, because that showed me that minimal miles, I wasn't because at that stage, Bill was training the Heelys. And as you and I know, the Heelys they would have been a godsend to a USA track team, because the boys could run everything from 5,000 steeplechase, up to the 10,000. They would have probably dominated the track team. But they were so natural that, if they were running 60, 70 miles a week, that was just their natural ability, and they didn't need a lot. So that year went through, and it went through like, I don't know. It went so bad that at the end of the season, I sort of said to Gary after the national champs, a week or two after, I'm going to quit. And he goes, what are you going to quit for? I said, geez, Gary, I finished 42nd last week. This sucks, This is not right. He goes, and that was when Arthur had just come home. So he said, let me go talk to Dad. And because at that time, Arthur had decided he was going to be coaching girls, right? Because he had enough of the guys. They were too hard at that stage. Anyway, it was just all, I don't know how things, sometimes things just come together. Anyway, so I worked as I said, I worked for the government then. So I was a telecom linesman. But at that time, I was a fault man. So, I get called out when people's phones weren't working or lines were down or whatever. And it so happened that Monday morning I had a job. And I cruised down Stoddard Road to Richardson Road corner, and I stop outside the store, which was a 4-square, and I walk in, and there's a guy stacking cans on the shelf, and I didn't realize that the store I was walking into at this time, I'll tell you the story as it was. So as I'm walking in, the guy stacking cans, he's got his back to me. He goes, Kevin, you left a trail around knee deep in Cornwall Park last Saturday. They're filling it in with a backhoe because you've dug up all the earth because you couldn't lift your knees. And I turn around and it's Barry McGee, right? Barry said, how's it going? So I explained to Barry that, I was on the cusp of calling it quits. And he said to me, hey, don't do that. He says, I know that Bill is coaching you right now, but Bill's was heading off overseas to take some tour away. He said, what say while Bill's gone, I give you 6 weeks of program and you see how it goes. Barry was then coaching Danny Warden, and I can't think, Roger Weatherly, and Roger and I were good mates. And Roger and Danny had run very well that week, and I think Danny had finished up like 11th or something. I mean, Danny Warden, he gave everything. And I thought, well, if Danny can do that, So I said, okay. So my first week of training under Barry went from 60 miles a week to 100 miles a week. The second week under Barry was the same again. And I had two good mates that coming around. One was Fred and one was Gary. So anyway, the third week, we went around, we'd run Waitarua each week. On the third week was a Sunday, run around Waitarua. I get all the way back to Hendon Avenue. I'm with Gary, with Liddy. Run down Hendon Avenue, and I go to, I'm about a mile and a half from home. And I said, I can't run another goddamn step. You know, my language wouldn't have been as nice back then.
No, no.
So I said, you go on. And he said, no, no. I said, no, go on, go on. I'll run and jog home. So I ran and jogged home. So it was the first time I'd actually walked the last mile of Waitarua. Then I dragged my sorry ass out of bed the next morning because now Barry had added 3 mornings of 5 miles a week. Yeah. So not only, so I had to get Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I had to get up every morning and run another 5 miles. So that gave me like a 115-mile week. Somehow, I made the Oaraka Wellington Masterman team that year. So it was my first time. So off we went down there, and it so happened that there was Fred, Julian, Dave Searle, and one other. Couldn't fly down that afternoon to Wellington. So there was 4 of them still working. So they went to the airport that night, and Wellington was fogged in, so they couldn't get there. So they rushed and took the express. But then we had to rearrange the team. So at that time, Arch Jelly was our selector and mid-team manager. So I went from running the third lap up the hill to running the second lap. So there was Rex Matterford, then myself, and then Rod Nixon Smith was meant to run another lap, but he ran up the hill. So the first lap was a tailwind out of Wellington, and it was neck to neck all the way down. Of course, then they handed over to me, and I've probably been shit scared of letting them down. I ran the lap of my life, and I pulled a minute or so out of the guy that I was running against from Wellington, and all very cheerfully handed over to Rod Nixon Smith, and thought, okay, Rod's been running well. He'll boom up the hill, and of course, as we all start driving up the hill after I've cooled down and got my gear on, we find Rod walking. All our hearts drained because all the hard work that Rex had done, myself, was going out the window. But anyway, Terry Matterford ran down the other side and made up some ground. But at the very end of it all, we finally did win that relay. And then realized then that I was on the right track with Barry. So, we sat down and we chatted, and I said, well, I'm going to have to tell Bill when he's back. And he said, well, I'll handle that for you. So he had the conversation with Bill, and I become a McGee guy. The training was great. The camaraderie with all the guys was fantastic. And, Barry would set my schedule. And, if you honestly looked at it, he had 120-mile weeks in there, week in, week out. But I always added more. So sometimes I was running 140, sometimes I'd run 150. And at one particular stage in the summer of one year, I was running around 160 and 70 because, well, holidays were there. I was still with the telecom, so we were having days on, days off, so I could run some more. But, McGee for me was fantastic. I found out many years later, not during, but many years after, that he and Arthur were concocting training programs and stuff to see how much a person could take. And I was the recipient of some of that, training or experimentation. And of course, it worked out fine for me. So I never had a problem. And even when I was in the States, I still would liaise with Barry on my coaching and what I needed to do. I would use the same coaching basics with people like Palone when I coached them, or Pete Pfitzinger. when I was up in the US, or any of the other guys that, I coached up there, Beardsley, Bruce Bickford, who was, a bunch of guys that I ran with were on the Lydiard McGee or McGee Lydiard program. Um, and it never went away, right? So whatever I was shared with, I shared around, because, part of coaching, part of running is to, same in my work, is whatever knowledge I have, why reinvent the wheel if you found a way to do it properly or as well as you can do it. So, when it came around to when Jeanette and I and the kids left to the US, there was an opportunity that we took. And with the ideas, well, if it doesn't work out, we can always come back to lovely New Zealand. But it worked out better than I thought. I was in marketing. Then I took over the New Balance. I actually started and founded the New Balance Track Club after Boston Marathon, because all our guys were wearing Greater Boston on their singlets instead of New Balance. And then I got called into a meeting on a Tuesday morning right after it, and the lady that was in charge of our apparel was very upset, to say the least, because we had, I think at that time, we probably had 6 or 7 guys in the top 15, but there was no New Balance other than that little NB on the singlet. And they don't show the shoes the guys are running in, because it's all a headshot and chest shot. And I had Elliott Lounge on my singlet, which they paid me $500 to put on. So, money's money wherever it was in those days. So I took it. Anyway, in the meeting, it was sort of bandied about. They asked me a question. I said, "Why don't you ask the guy who was head of sales and marketing for that particular thing?" And he also did the promo. And they go, "Well, he's no longer here." I go, "What happened?" "No, we let him go today." And they go, "Oh. So what would you suggest, Kevin?" I said, "Why don't we start the New Balance Track Club?" They said, "Okay, go do it." So I walked out the door, and fortunately, with some of the connections I had, I was able to call the track and field office in Indianapolis and hooked it up. And that's how we started. After a number of years of doing that, I too much travel and been way too many times. So I was working on shoes anyway for people like Tracy. I was coming up with ideas how to make them lighter and more breathable, and I try them myself. And being a marathoner, and I had run steeple and I had run track. I had a whole bunch of things I do. So I was making steeplechase shoes for Bruce Bickford. I used to take them and drill holes through them to drain the water out. And then, back in those days, they didn't have a real, what we call an open weave mesh where water could run out through the top. So I would drill holes in the heel and through the plate and give them to him. And he thought they were the greatest things that were sliced bread, because there was no water sitting in the shoe after you've been through the steeplechase. It was 2 steps and the water is gone. So a job came available, or a position came available in development for New Balance. And I applied. And I went up and had the interview with the job with a guy called Steve Burris, and I'd met Steve a few times, but he was a runner at heart, and so I got the position. So I went to New Balance Running and carried on what I was doing. And then opportunity came after that. About 4 years later, I got a headhunter call me and offered me, see I was interested in the job at Nike. And, so off I went. And I thought, you know what? You can't sit in one spot all the time. I want to go out and learn more and see how other people do things. And that was the rationale behind it all. So when they offered me the job, where I worked was 45 minutes out of Boston, up in Lawrence, Mass, where New Balance had a factory and the development center and a warehouse. And I got in my car, drove down to Boston, and had a meeting with Jim Davis, who was the guy that was instrumental in bringing me to the States, because I'd met with him in New Zealand when he was here. And I told him that I was going to move on to Nike. And he says, "Well, I can offer you the same." And I said, it wouldn't be fair on him for a start. and then people would expect me to probably do more or be whatever. And I said to him, and also I want to explore what other companies do. So he said, fair enough. So we remained friends, and Jeanette's always been in touch with him up until a few years or more back. Whenever Jim was visiting New Balance here, he would drop her a line, and if she was in New Zealand, he'd go and meet her for lunch. And so I did a few years in Nike, but it was an old boys school type thing. And it was, I was in running, and then I moved into tennis. And I actually, when they moved, they had Agassi, Sampras, they had all the boys coming in, and they were going to start a women's part of tennis because they didn't have a women's tennis development. So I was put into that position. So I developed all the women's tennis products. So I met with Mary Jo Fernandez and the girls and worked on what they liked in their shoes. And then I ended up going to Adidas in Portland, Oregon. And when I went in, it was just a small player. It was just starting, and reminded me much of New Balance, to be quite honest, because they had just come out of bankruptcy. And we were 3 developers, myself, and John, and Eric Attard, who was a French dude, about 9 designers, marketing. It was really cool, really cool. So at that moment, I was working on everything that came across your desk. So it could be walking, hiking, you name it, it was done there, even down to crib shoes. And then my boss at that time was Glenn Bennett, who ended up as very high up at Adidas, just recently retired. He came to me one day and said, how would you like to go to Germany, Kevin? We've cleaned house over there and we don't have anybody in development. And one of the guys that is there wants to move into European side of things. So we went home and talked to Jeanette, and we went to Germany. And I spent in the 3.5 years in Herzogenaurach, which is the head office. And the position I took was actually the tennis position, development of all tennis product for Adidas in those years. And I worked on some fantastic stuff. It was feature wear, a TS95, a shoe that was just mind-boggling, but basically it was built to be used at Wimbledon. And back in those days, everything that you built to be used at Wimbledon had to be passed by the people at Wimbledon. So, for many years you sort of dressed in white, and they could only have a little logo, and they couldn't have any big things on there. And they also went to shoes, and we come up with a shoe that could reject, when you flexed it, it would kick the dirt out. We come up with a bottom unit. We sent that over, and they wouldn't allow it to be used because they thought it was unfair to the other players because nobody else had that technology. And then because I was in cycling, so I worked on a lot of cycling product and worked closely with the Telecom team, which is the Tour de France team, which won a couple of years later. I asked if I'd like to move out to Asia, and my first part was moving to Guangzhou in 97, 98. That was totally different. 3.5-hour car ride every day to the factory that I managed. 10:30, get down there by whenever it was, 1:30. If I could leave earlier, I would. Arrive home some nights at midnight, depending on the factory and what the schedule was for the day. Yeah. And so I did some stints in China. Then I went from there to Indonesia, and then back to China, and then back to Indonesia. And then I came home for a bit, for a year or so. Then I went back to Indonesia for Reebok, and then Reebok was brought out by Adidas. So I ended up back in Adidas. So I spent 23.5 years with Adidas and Reebok. And I've worked on some fantastic product with total new technologies and foams, and a part of development is commercialization and making sure it fits into production. So a part of it is educating people how to make the shoe, because we build shoes don't come out. It takes an 18-month cycle for a shoe to hit the market. I mean, things are getting quicker today, but that's on the lower end, cheaper models. But on a whole, performance models take some time. I worked on the first Predator soccer shoe when the boys were developing it. Well, I was in Germany. That was the one where you had the rubber panel on the toe. When you kicked the ball, it would do the curve, and that was the first plates that were injected, proper plates that were injected plates, 2 colors. Yeah, seen some great product, worked on some great stuff, had a wonderful time, and worked with some wonderful people and different nationalities.
Quite a bit different from the childhood upbringing.
Totally different to what I thought I was ever going to be doing, to
Yeah.
be honest, but a part of it was taking the chance to do things that were offered. So if you don't take that chance, sometimes you can rue it. I didn't ever want to, and Jeanette and I were on the same page. We never wanted to look back and say, I wish we had done that. We should have tried it. We did try it. It's been successful. I mean, it's not been smooth, easy sailing when you're living away from your kids a lot, like I have been. And then you're working with nationalities. When I first went to China, hardly anybody in the team spoke English. So a lot of it was, learning a little bit of Chinese, learning, and I was pretty good at reading faces and understanding what people were trying to tell me or show me. And I wasn't a guy that I would go to the mold shop and look at back in those days, I used to carve what you see on your foot was carved in wood. And, I had to know how to read a technical blueprint on how we're going to have flex screws and color dams and all those things that make that shoe look beautiful, right? How to stitch an upper and what materials to use and what linings to use and what, all those things were, you had to test. So if something broke and didn't pass the test, you had to find something or way to get it to work, or work with the supplier who supplied that mesh or that rubber or that. Can you do better? What can we do to make it better? So it's not, I mean, the knowledge I gained and has been humongous, to be quite honest. And from when I was like 15, did I ever think I was going to be doing this or having such a say in how things were made, pushing factories and updating their machinery, getting a different mindset, looking at things in a different way. Yeah, we can do it, and convincing them that this can be done. There's easy ways and there's hard ways, but sometimes even the most difficult can be done easily. At 15, to be where I am now at 72, I think I achieved far more than I ever expected to achieve.
Your life has been fascinating and far more involved in high level business than you ever envisaged.
Yes.
But your running career in New Zealand was a standout. Who are your favourite training buddies?
Gary and Fred were my 2 guys, that were with me, rain, hail, or shine. It was, I mean, when I needed help, they were there. There was a lot I did by myself, of course, but they were my 2 pickup guys. Those are the 2 guys that supported me every weekend, during the week even. Roger Willie, another guy that I ran with quite a lot in the evenings, because in the domain, and because we were McGee guys, a lot of our training was the same during the week as well. So, we'd be doing fartlek, as in Commonwealth Park on Wednesday night in the dark, jumping fences, putting our spikes on to run 12 miles of fartlek. When you think about it, we were, or a 10-mile time trial around the domain on the grass, slipping and sliding. They were the guys. I couldn't wish for 3 or 4 better guys to run with every time, right? They were, Gary, the first time I had to run a 33 miler, I called Gary up and I said, not doing Wateroo tomorrow, Gary. or Thursday, I think it was, Thursday night. He said, "What are you doing?" He said, I told him, I said, I got to go right around the White Tax. He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Oh, it's a 33 mile. Well, from my house, it's like 35, actually."
Was it Mountain Road?
Yeah, so Gary and I, you go all the way out through Henderson Valley and take the back, you start the Waitarua at the back of Henderson, way out, and you're running, you got that huge bloody climb, so he said, "What time are you going to start?" And I said, "What do you think?" And he said, "Why don't we start at 6?" I said, 6? He said, "Well, it's going to take, and he said, "How long do you think, what did Barry say about running it? How long?" And he said, "Well, Barry told me 3 hours and 40 minutes. Take it easy, don't run fast." And he goes, "Okay." So Gary turns up that morning and off we go. And that guy, in his head, he must have had a stopwatch. He must have been born with a stopwatch, because we clicked off, let's say 6:30, 6:15 miles, hour after hour. No, if I get into head, he go, "Hey," he'd call me back, "we have to stick at this and this." And we ran, I think, 3 hours and 30 minutes and had a cup of tea and a few cold drinks afterwards, right? But that was how Gary was. I could tell him what I needed to do. If I was trying to run a 10, there was one night we had to do a 10-mile time trial. It was a Friday night. And McGee had said, "You got to do the one out through New Lynn. It's the old one that we used to do under Arthur." And I said to Gary, "I don't even know where it is." And Gary said, "Well, I know it." So off we went. And he says, "Well, how fast do you have to run it?" Well, I said, "Barry told me 56 minutes. He says, "Okay." So off we went. We ran it 56 minutes. And it was hilly. So that was the thing he was. And, Fred was there nearly every weekend. He was there, rain, hail, or shine. Always had a wise ass crack about what we were doing. And, Fred was always, they were my two.
He was a rogue.
He was a rogue. You run along and pee on your leg, start laughing.
Oh, that stunt, he was uncanny. Like,
Did he ever?
Graham Struthers, the first time he joined our group for a Waitarua, I think he used to do the mountain road circuit.
You're right, yeah, we'd run up mountain road sometimes.
Well, Graham Struthers joined our group up the Waitarua, and I hadn't seen Graham before. I mean, we all ran in Auckland, we sort of knew who each other were, but we didn't train in the same groups. But anyway, he rocked up, and I think Fred thought he'd just try him out. But I learned from that you never try out a redhead. Very handy marathon runner too, wasn't he?
Really? He was good. Yeah, Fred ran what, 2:18, I think. At Hamilton.
Pretty handy,
yeah. Yeah, he was pretty handy. He trained hard. He did. He trained hard. He gave everything to it. I mean, he was pretty quick too. He wasn't no slouch at any time. Actually, he brought up Struthers, and Struthers came into it a little later in my time with me, and he trained a lot, ran a lot of Waitaruas with us. Of course, there was then Pallone and those boys. And then sometimes at our house on them, as things were, there'd be a dozen guys running from the house and down there in Shepherd Avenue. It depended on the weekend and on the race day. I mean, John used to come over frequently on weekends and run with me as well from Waitarua, but that was a different story at times. It was like, "I don't want to race today, John." "No, we're not going to do that."
Oh, John Walker?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Walker ran a lot of, the year that John went away and broke the world record for the mile, he spent a lot of time training with me during that winter. And at least 3-4 nights, or 4 days a week. He was always there for the long runs. I mean, he could run Waitarua like no tomorrow. Yeah, one time he turned up and he says, and I said, "Not running hard today, eh, John?" No, we're not going to run hard today. But we had a bit of so we went off on the run. We were doing Waitarua, and he was hammering every hill. And I go, "You know what? I'm getting a little fed up with this." So I decided that instead of coming back through we come back through Titirangi and not back through New Lynn. I decided that, you could go down and go up through Blockhouse Bay. You'd take that long downhill, and come into Blockhouse Bay. So I thought, bugger this. teach you a lesson. So I took him down through turned and we went into Blockhouse Bay where there's more hills, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then he's still like going gangbusters. So then I thought, shit, I'm not going to go down White Swan. I'm going to take him up Hillsborough Road. So I went up Hillsborough.
Oh, that's a beauty. Yeah.
Rode along, climbed past the golf course, and then turned into Dominion Road home, right? And then finally, he sort of succumbed when we got down by the toilets there, just before the Dominion Road shops. And then we went in the house. We got back to the house, and he said, "What do you got to drink?" So we drank whatever was in the fridge. And he said, "What else you got?" I said, "Well, I got beer and lemonade." So we sat there, had maybe four bottles of beer and a couple of bottles of lemonade. So we drank shandies for the rest of the afternoon. And then he lay down and had a nap. I could run by myself. I mean, there were nights where I had to because what I was doing was totally different to what the other guys were doing. Or, I had the Hillsborough Blockhouse Bay Hill Circuit. I would do that every Thursday night. And Liddy would run a lot of that with me. But there would be nights where I had to do it.
Gary Lydiard?
Yeah, Gary.
We didn't mention before that Gary is Arthur Lydiard's son, so not everyone watching this would realise that.
Oh, okay, so Gary was Arthur's son. He was, nuggety, tough little runner,
Yeah.
And boy, as I said, I think he was born with a stopwatch in his head because you tell him what you had to do, you tell him the pace you want to go at, and off you go. And I owe a lot to Gary and Fred, to be quite honest.
What about your first marathon? I remember I only started running in 1976. That was my first year on the track.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember you made it to Montreal. You were selected. And you sliced your leg with a skill saw.
That was 77. So my first marathon was 73, right? Rotorua. But actually, it was actually meant to be at 74, sorry. So after the Commonwealth Games in 74, I suffered plantar fasciitis. I stuffed it up running stood on a stone during the National Road Champs the previous year. It had never recovered. And I was running the miles, but I wasn't running the hills. And I could do the speed work, but I couldn't quite get up on my toes. So anyway, cut it short, 74 was a disaster. I ended up watching the race because Taylor was running so well. I was looking over my shoulder all the time, watching him around the track till I realized that he'd left me. So I got over that injury. After the Commonwealth Games 74, I was training through that. I got over the injury. And McGee says, "Hey, your last long run is going to be a bit harder." And I go, "What's that?" He said, "You go Rotorua, run the Rotorua Marathon." He said, "Go down there, run that marathon. That'll be the finish of your build-up. And then we'll start whatever it was, speed work and other things." So I went down to Rotorua. And Fred was meant to run that race marathon with me, but at that time he was real busy. So some of his training was a bit, we'd be middle of a big long run and he had to divert because he at that time had a courier business going. And I thought he was going to win Rotorua. So anyway, we go down there, gun goes off, everybody hears out. And it was the old course back then, not the new course. So every hill you could find was in it, right? And you went out past the airport. So for the first 10 miles, you're just running uphill. And I don't know, I got to 20K and I was by myself. Because you go over one hill and then you swing around the back. And this is bloody great long climb up. And so I started into the hill, and by the time I got to the top, there was nobody with me. And I ran all the way back and I won it by 9 minutes or so. I ran 2:20. So that was like now in a marathon run. Where my heart had been set running track. And that was it. That set me on the marathon path. So I went in Rotorua, and then I went down to Hamilton and ran the Hamilton Marathon that year and won that. And on the old course, I ran 2:16, and I ran against that guy Neil Ryan. That got me an invite to Melbourne.
Oh, he's the Australian.
Yeah, he was an Australian guy. There was Neil, Mike Ryan, and Kevin Ryan. So there was three Ryans. None of us related to each other in the same bloody race.
Yeah.
Scotchman and Irishman, and God knows what Neil was. Ryan's 1, 2, and 3, I think, that day. And so that was it. I mean, I went to Victoria and won the Melbourne Championship over there and ran 2:13, and I guess that was my career launched. But and then of course I qualified for 76. That didn't go well, and I ended up with my tailbone. It turned out I jumped a fence in Cornwall Park, and something went pop, and nobody could figure out what the actual problem was. They thought I'd torn a butt muscle, and they kept giving me cortisone injections. And turned out many months later, and after a disappointing Olympics, George Gibson just talked to me. He said, "You should go see this doctor in Browns Bay. His name's Dr. Burnell. He's a chiropractic medicine, and he's two medicines to go together." So he was all normal, everyday doctor as well. So I called him up and made an appointment. Went in to see him. Told him what the problem was. He said, "Get up on the bed." I got up on the bed, and he got my legs as wide apart as he could, and he snapped them shut, and this is loud pop. And he says, "Oh, your tailbone was out, coccyx was out." He said, "That normally happens to pregnant women when they give birth." I said to her, "Well, all I did was step in a hole about 6 months ago." Anyway, he straightened me out, and that was it. I've had some weird injuries.
Yeah.
But yeah, so got back to it. The purpose then was, of course, to qualify for Moscow. But and then Boston was 78. So marathons were my thing. It turned out to be, and road running. But I liked all. That was not like I had one particular distance I liked. I liked to run cross country. I liked running road. I love running relays. And then the other thing with me is how hard can I go and how hard can I test something, and that's been even with work and everything else. Is how hard can I push this? What can I do to make it better? As part of my life, And then people I work with, part of helping them get better in what they're doing. I look back quite happy with what I've done.
Well, I think you got to be, really. What you've done is tremendous.
Yeah, no.
From my perspective, anyway.
No, I don't have no regrets. I'm just so happy to be able to have the opportunity to do what I've done. And I mean, and if you look at it in the bigger picture, the opportunity to do what I did was given to me by moving to Barry McGee. If I hadn't got him as a coach.
Opponents in New Zealand, guys who you found very difficult to deal with on the track or on the cross country or road, hard men.
Hard men?
Yeah.
John was here. I just saw John 2 weeks ago. We were reminiscing, and he brought up the Howick road race where I beat him by a second.
Howick?
Yeah.
10 miler.
And the 10 miler. Remember the Howick 10 miler?
Yeah.
It was a tough bugger. Well, one time, Arch decided that John should run it. Unbeknown to me, right? Because I was still in the middle of the build-up or something. But anyway, I get out there, and there's John warming up. I go, "What the hell are you doing here?" And he goes, "Oh, I'm here going to run this 10 miler." And he said, Arch wants me to run it. And of course, Arch is there too with a stopwatch. He always had a stopwatch. Arch was really cool. Arch. He always had a stopwatch. He was always willing to give you the time and tell you, what was going on around you. He was a cool guy. Yeah. So anyway, I go, "Oh shit, John, bloody hell, God, wish I had maybe not run so far hard on Friday and had some energy for today, really." Anyway, and it's a handicap start, so the buggers give him like a minute on me. I go, "What the hell what are you eating for breakfast?" I mean, I'm giving John Walker a minute. He should be back here on scratch with me. No, Kevin. Yeah, John's not a 10. He's not a real road. I go, "You don't know John like I know John. And he's off down the road like a bloody wild horse, man. He's gone." and all the way back, and because then I could see Arch up the road, and he was giving them time splits, right? And jump in his car when I went by and race up and tell John what I was doing, and if I closed the gap or opened the gap or what it was. Anyway. I come down onto the main road, and there's John. I can see him right in front of me, and I go, "Oh shit! I haven't closed anything on this guy. If anything, he might have got something on me." So I'm sprinting as hard as I could because there's a gentle down, and then I'm watching John, and he's coming up on somebody who was in the race that is a handicapped person. He caught up with on the handicap, and he had to ease up because he was going to run over the guy. So he had to ease up and then go around him, right? And I go, "Oh shit!" And I sprinted as hard because I realized he'd lost whatever it was, a second or two right there, because he had to slow up. Otherwise, he's going to bowl this poor guy over. And I went right around this guy and sprinted in, and I beat him by a second. So I put it down to that one person slowing John down as he was trying to come in the gate, right? Because he had to ease. But yeah, Rod was tough. I mean, I was fortunate. I was probably lucky that I'd have more wins over them than they sort of had over me.
You had battles with, I think, John Dixon too.
Oh, yeah.
Yellow up steeples?
Yeah, he got me at the steeples.
Yeah.
Then I got him back on at the track. He got me at the steeples. I mean, there's days where you just don't have it, and the other guy does have it, and he ran a wonderful race that day. But I sort of, I always had in the back of my mind, well, that's all right. I'm going to get even with you, and I'll probably get two back. If you got one, I'm going to have two. So, I got him in the 10,000 in Mount Smart that year. I beat him at the national champs in the 10. I knew I would listen at certain times to find a weak spot, of somebody, the way they were breathing. If the lap was hard and it was going to be hard, I'd put in a little extra and if the guy went, huh, and then I go, "Gotcha." Pretty well analysed how people were feeling that I was running against. Because I knew if they had it for the day, and I also knew when I didn't have it for the day, Christchurch at the 10-mile champs down there, I knew I didn't have it, but I made sure that I hurt some guys before I actually, gave it up. Well, I didn't really give it up, but I made them pay the price of winning. That was a part of my scenario. Even if I was out on my feet, I was going to make you earn that win. Was a pretty evil sort of guy.
Yeah, you were. Been great talking, Kevin.
No problem, mate. My pleasure, and great to see you again.
Yeah, great to see you.